Hi, this is Kristen Oya, and the last time I was talking about epithelial tissue, the video suddenly cut off, and so I left off basically summarizing epithelial tissue. I already talked about epithelial tissue, and I was simply directing you to this image, which is within the section 4.2 student outline. I think it's a very good summary page to help you remember the big picture, the basic structure of the different types of epithelial tissue, along with the examples of where it's located in the body, and then its major functions. So today I wanted to move on and talk to you a little bit more about other aspects of epithelial tissue. For example, I want to discuss glands. Epithelial tissue can serve as covering and lining different parts of the body, but it can also serve as glandular tissue. So glandular epithelium, or glands made of epithelial tissue, include both endocrine and exocrine glands. They include unicellular versus multicellular glands, and they also include exocrine glands that are classified according to their function. So all of those things are included. So first of all, what is a gland? A gland is basically a cell or an organ that secretes substances for use elsewhere in the body. Or a gland can be a cell or an organ that releases a substance for elimination from the body. Glands are basically composed of epithelial tissue in a connective tissue framework and capsule. So the connective tissue provides the support, and the actual glandular material is epithelial in nature. Some organs have both an endocrine gland function and an exocrine gland function. Some examples might be the liver, the gonads, which would include the ovaries for a female, and the testes for a male, and then also the pancreas. So what's the difference between an endocrine gland and an exocrine gland? Well, endocrine glands are different than exocrine glands because they don't have a duct. Exocrine glands have a duct. So you could have glandular material with a tube, and the gland will produce a substance, and the substance will travel up the duct to be released onto the apical surface. So this could be releasing a substance into the digestive tract, or it could be releasing a substance onto the surface of the skin. An example of an exocrine gland could be an oil gland or a sweat gland in the skin. On the other hand, an endocrine gland doesn't have a duct. It produces a substance, it doesn't have any contact with the apical surface, and it doesn't have any ducts. So it produces a hormone, and it secretes the hormone or this chemical messenger directly into the blood. It can even release it directly into the lymph. But in the picture shown here, basically, it's showing endocrine cells producing a hormone and being released into the blood. The hormone travels through the blood, and it acts on specific cells that it's targeting, and it'll cause those cells to cause something to happen. An exocrine gland is different because it does maintain its contact with the body surface by way of this duct, which is basically a tube made up of epithelial cells. It could, for example, convey sweat from a sweat gland or a sudoriferous gland to the surface of the skin. Examples of exocrine glands could include sweat glands, mammary glands, which are the milk secreting glands in women's breasts, the tear glands around your eyes. An example of an organ that has both exocrine and endocrine function. If you think about the pancreas is primarily an exocrine gland when it functions for the digestive system because it produces digestive enzymes that are secreted through a duct into the small intestine as digestive juices, and it helps chemically break down the food that you eat. At the same time, there are some isolated patches of endocrine cells in the pancreas as well. And these cells release hormones directly into the blood. One hormone is insulin and one is glucagon. And these two hormones cause opposite effects, but they both control blood sugar levels. So the pancreas is both an exocrine and an endocrine gland. There are unicellular glands that are found in the epithelium that is predominantly non-secretory tissue. So there can be unicellular glands that are endocrine glands, or they can be exocrine glands. And one example of this would be a goblet cell. A goblet cell is a unicellular gland. It secretes a substance called mucin that when it mixes with the watery extracellular fluid becomes mucus. So basically a goblet cell secretes mucus. Another unicellular gland would be the endocrine cells of the stomach and the small intestine. So what's the basic exocrine gland structure? Well, I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit bigger here. The exocrine glands have a capsule. It's basically a connective covering of most glands. So in this particular picture, this right here is the capsule containing the gland. Right there. Usually the connective tissue creates septa, which are dividers or trabeculae that divide the gland into sections. A septa or a trabeculae would be extensions of the capsule that divide the interior of the gland into basic compartments or lobes. And then the lobes can be further divided into even smaller lobes. Besides the capsule, an exocrine gland has something called the stroma. And the stroma is basically a connective tissue framework for the gland, kind of like scaffolding or a connective tissue skeleton. And it basically supports and organizes the glandular tissue, gives it some structure. And then, besides the capsule and the stroma, there's something called the parenchyma. So far, I've shown you capsule, the septa, and the parenchyma. The parenchyma are the cells that perform the tasks of synthesis and secretion of its product. Typically, the parenchyma cells are either cuboidal or simple columnar epithelium. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the different types of exocrine glands. Okay, so first of all, we can classify exocrine glands structurally. And that's basically according to the shape of the gland or the secretory part of the gland. So shape is one, and the other one is the arrangement of the ducts or the tubes. So the structural classification of exocrine glands is based on the shape and the arrangement of the ducts. Now the secretory part of the gland is the part that secretes. Secretory means to secrete, related to secreting. And one shape is called the alveolar. Sometimes these are called acinar. But basically, they're secretory cells that form this dilated sac. It's kind of a shape that's kind of bulbous and round. And then there's a tubular shape. That's when the duct and the secretory portion have a uniform diameter. It's kind of tube-shaped. And then we have a shape that where the gland part is both tubular and acinar. So it's kind of a combination of the two shapes. And then, of course, we can go on to arrangement of ducts. If you look at the picture above, you can see how the duct is shown on the left, and then the alveolar cells that are the secretory region is shown on the right. Okay, so the ducts can be classified according to whether or not they have a simple arrangement or a complicated arrangement. The simple arrangement is basically an unbranched duct. So you can see you just have a single tube here that basically leads to the surface, or to the apical surface or the opening. That's a simple single duct, unbranched. Now the compound ducts are branched, and if we look at an example of a compound, we can see that there are several ducts that basically converge into one. So here we have 3 ducts converging into one, and 3 ducts converging into one, whereas the simple have basically one single unbranched duct. And there are a variety of combinations, basically, for all these different types of structural classifications of exocrine glands. Okay, you can also classify exocrine glands based on their type of secretions. Okay, so glands produce different products. At least exocrine glands do. So serous glands produce a thin, watery secretion. An example of a serous gland secretion would be perspiration. It's a thin, watery secretion. Sweat. Another one would be milk. Milk from a mother's breast. Or tears. Tears from your eyes when you cry. Or digestive juices. They're thin, watery secretions. Another type of secretion would be a mucus secretion. Mucus glands produce a mucousy, thicker product made up of glycoprotein. Glyco is sugar, protein is protein. Mucin. Mucin is when it mixes with extracellular fluid becomes mucus. Mucus glands secrete a substance that absorbs water to form kind of a sticky, thick secretion called mucus. Examples, well, one example would be the goblet cell, which is a unicellular mucus gland. And by the way, when we talk about mucus itself, it's spelled M-U-C-U-S. But when we're talking about a mucus gland, it's spelled M-U-C-O-U-S. Okay, so another type of secretion, another type of gland based on the type of secretion would be a mixed gland. A mixed gland contains both cell types, and they produce a mixture of the 2 types of secretions. So it could have both serous and mucus secretions. And then a cytogenic gland, it is an exocrine gland that releases whole cells, such as sperm or egg cells. Cyte means cell. So, and genic is like to produce. So it's producing or releasing whole cells, like the sperm and the egg. All right, so there are 4 types of exocrine glands based on the type of secretion. We can also classify exocrine glands according to the mode or the manner in which it secretes its product. So the first one is the merocrine gland, which is also known as the eccrine gland. Okay, I'm going to pause for just one moment.